I live in Nampa. Because the winters are better there. Just so you know, when you go out in the cold wind, it's 55 degrees in Boise right now. And my tulips are off about that far. That's the reason I live in Nampa. Anyway, the papers you have are the key that I use for every Lonestar I start. And the instructions on how to do the next page, I had to make up because I made about 40 Lonestars, and I give most of them away. In fact, 2 years ago when we started talking about me doing this, I discovered I didn't have a Lonestar in my linen closet because I always gave them away. And this is the go-to quilt. If I need to do one fast, this is the one I do. And I've had people roll their eyes at me like, you know what? Well, I'm a glutton for punishment. What can I tell you? And one of the things that I do is I always use this key in the front. And until just last weekend, I'd never wrote down the instructions because it was all up here. I just knew what size strips you did, and from then on, and you'll see when I talk to you about the background, it'll say approximately 22 inches because that's what they measure when I sew them. The big thing you need to remember when you start is check your 1/4 of an inch, because it will make a world of difference on how many puffs you have when you go to lay your quilt out. The other thing is, don't ever hang a 45-degree angle piece of fabric over anything. You lay them flat. So that's the biggest thing. And if you have a wonderful long armor, she can quilt it so she can get most of your bubbles out. And those are the long arm people I stay with. Because if I'm having a crappy day, you'll notice that I tend to get more bubbles. Anyway, when you look at the key in the front, you'll notice that there are a series. I usually make this repeat because it's easier, and reverse is fairly easy too. You just have to have the yellow in that one you gotta have more fabric. And I auditioned plenty of fabrics. And the reason I do that is because if you take the F row there are 6. That is where your background fabric connects to at that point. If you want it to blend in, then you don't have a lot of contrast. Thank you. My mind wanders off occasionally. Anyway, if you do want, I have made a quilt. My daughter calls it the tuxedo quilt because the first point, the 6th row, and the last point are all red. The middle ranges from medium gray to black. And then I put the whitest fabric I can find for the background. My daughter says it looks like a guy in a tuxedo with a red cummerbund and a red bow tie. And it works well. Now, depending on where you put your colors, if the color speaks to you loudly, you may want to put it in that number 1 spot. Because then your small star in the middle will show up. Yes,
Which is the number one spot?
the red one up here on repeat.
Row A, down at the bottom or?
No, the one up there. It doesn't really make any difference. I just think of one starting with the top.
Okay, that's great. So then are the two turquoise ones, is that row 2? Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Anyway, when you decide your 6 fabrics that you want to have in your star, decide where you want to put them. Now, a lot of times I decide where they go because of how much fabric I have. And so that's how that works out. Now, the one I want to show you over here, and I had to redo some of my posters because they were too light and you couldn't see them. That's not going to work because you people won't be able to see. If you look over here at radiating, that is a quilt that you can start out. The turquoise at the top is 3 inches. The most you will have to have is that purple or magenta, and that would be 18 inches. And you start from the top and pick any colors you want. It's a great thing for those little strips you have. You can make the start of that really easy and not a lot of money spent on fabric because you can use such small pieces. So that's one of the things on that one. Usually before I had to color it in, I went from pale, pale blue all the way to navy at the last one down. Now, when you decide what colors you want and where you want to put them, the key up on your paper has 6 lines. Well, I always put in that, on that key, I usually do one with zigzags on them, and that would be number 1, or, plaid, or whatever it is, I describe that and put it on there. Then you put the number that you list, 1 through 6, and you put it on your key where you want that fabric to be. And then when you're ready to cut your strips, which on a queen size quilt is 3 inches. You want to count, because you got to know how many strips to make the star you've designed. So you count how many 1s, how many 6s, and whatever you come up with, like the repeat, you would come up with 10 yellow strips because there's 10 yellow ones in there. And that works for me. And I keep that key with me every bit that I sew, because then you don't get messed up. By the way, if you get messed up with repeat, you can run into random before you know it. My father called me one day when I was sewing a repeat, and when I got it ready to laid it out flat, it was random. Well, this is the way I planned it, right? Didn't work that way. I want to show you, we have a couple quilts that I'll show you. This is my radiating quilt. I'm going to need some more hands. Take it easy. It's quartered. It's bias tape. Okay. And the reason I chose these colors is because I went into my fabric room and I found a piece of like leaky, and it had these colors in it. So that's going to be my background. And this will be my winter quilt to go on my bed.
So is that the radiating
Okay.
layout?
Can you turn it this way too? We will. Make sure the camera sees that.
And the background fabric of this is a cream on white, and it's paisley. And I think I'm gonna have my long arm quilter do it in a feather and do side to side, because it's my quilt.
Is that the radiating?
That's
style, laying it
radiating,
out, right?
because the same fabric does not repeat in the quilt. You okay with that one? We can put that one down? Thank you. This is a random. And when I looked at this fabric, this particular fabric, I thought of a circus tent and what the clowns look like. So this is my circus quilt. And it's been to lots of demonstrations. So I have no idea how bad the puffy bubbles are gonna be on this. I haven't put the background in because I just haven't found one I liked. But I chose the random fabric because all of the other colors are in that random fabric. They're just little dots. And it just reminded me of a circus tent. So, and I'm gonna fold this up because it's 45-degree angles. And I don't want it bubbles. Because my quilter said,
What do you mean by bubbles? What does that mean?
okay, I'll,
You're sewing along and you get a little tuck.
no, you just see where the center comes together there? That's what you want.
Yeah, there's no bubbles there.
There's no bubbles in there, but that doesn't mean with that one there won't be.
Well, let me see the bubbles.
I don't know whether the bubbles are gonna be in there. I made this many years ago. Who else wanted to say this?
Well, she keeps talking about it.
It's just if it doesn't lay
It won't
flat.
lay flat.
It just won't lay flat.
Yeah, it won't lay flat.
Okay.
And that's when you have your long armor, leave a circle around that where it's not flat and it'll come down. And nobody will know. That's one of the things I wanted to show you. Now, if you wanted a quilt, and I made this, just leave that. I made this a long time ago. And I took it off the bed I was sleeping in at my sister-in-law's house. Now, this is a very muted Lonestar. And the reason it is because I like this color. And then I went to the fabric room and picked out what I did. Now, I didn't like just the solid squares that are 22 inches. So I used the leftovers after you cut to make your star.
Can you turn it this way a little bit?
I cut the small stars in the big squares to just fill up the square.
So is this radiating?
No, I think it's repeat to think about it. Yeah, it's a repeat because this is your center. This that looks more pretty right here. And then if you do that one and you do the radiating, you only use 11 because when you think of 6 and you double it, you think of 12 pieces of fabric. It's 11. Yes.
Was it quilted with long arm?
Yes. I used to do quilt by hand. I got the badge. I don't need to do that anymore. Not that I could. I have rheumatoid arthritis, and my hands are the part that says, "You're gonna what?" This is one that I made out of necessity because I made the border on it, and the border on it is Judy Niemeyer. But the quilt, they said, that also was Judy Niemeyer, did not fit the border. I put enough work in that border, I wanted to put it on something. So I thought, okay, I'll make a Lonestar, because when I get through putting it together, it's 80 inches. Well, the only part that didn't fit was down here at this little corner. On every corner, there's a little part of the binding to make the border fit. Because I worked hard on that border. We can put that one out on the table. You can look at it later on. Now, let's talk about cutting these strips so you can make strip sets. Those strips are 3 inches. So you cut your strips 3 inches. Then you're going to make them into a strip set. When you start to do A, over here at random, you start with the orange. And then when you put the red to it, by the way, in your notes, it says put, if I meant for it to say put, but my fingers wanted but. So the B should be a P. It's when you're first putting your strip sets together. And it tells you to put them face to face, right sides together.
Number 8.
Number 8, yes, quilt construction. When you do that, when you sew the yellow to the orange, you want to move it back 2.5 inches. The reason being is you're going to cut in a diagonal. You got to move it back or you're going to lose a whole lot of fabric. So move it back 2 inches for each one of the strips you sew to that strip set. When you get 6 sewn together, you have row A. And the reason you don't use numbers is because your strip sets are now made and they have row A, row B, C, and so forth. And so it's very important to put them. I starch my fabric so it can almost walk. Because I do not like it stretching. That's where we want to go back and talk about buying the best fabric your budget will let you. There are 2 companies that they're in Joann's. They would have to hog tie me to make me take them home. Because they have real nice fabric to look at. But I could stretch it from here to those books. Not for this quilt. Because you will have bubbles. And the first Lonestar quilt, similar to Lonestar. My second quilt that I made was a broken star. Because that's what the daughter wanted.
What's the difference?
Well, this one has 8 points. The broken star has 32.
Wow.
Well, to get the colors that she wanted, I was a little uninformed, you might say, when I picked the one that was going to be in the center. And it, like I said, it could have stretched from here to there. Starch is your best friend. It's very cheap. You buy it at the grocery store and you put 1 for 1. And I have a clothes rack that sits in the tub of my guest bathroom. And that's where I put my fabric to dry after I've starched them. Yeah, the old-fashioned way. The cheap way, I understand and I have done to use Best Press, and I use it. But initially, I want to start with the best I can get.
So are you using?
Yes,
Will you explain the cheap starch? I've never starched anything in my life.
well, if it's a loose woven piece of fabric,
Okay, so put it in the wash machine?
no,
Okay.
get a bucket from Lowe's or
Okay,
Home Depot,
okay, bucket, okay.
a bucket, and put a 1-to-1 ratio, water and starch. When I'm doing a big quilt, the starch is about 1 bottle, and they're a gallon. Because I can wash the starch out, but I can't get it in if it stretches like this.
Okay, so just soak it in the bucket.
Soak it in the bucket, make sure you get all of the fabric in, and then
Pull it out.
pull it out, put it over the rack.
Do you bring it out?
Yeah, a little
A
bit.
little bit?
I got crummy hands, so mine are
Okay.
a lot of times
So
there.
just drape it over your rack to dry it.
Mhm.
Is it gonna be smooth at that point or is it iron?
No, you'll have to iron it.
Then you'll.
Absolutely, you'll have to iron it. And that's when you use the Best Press.
And then you don't use any steam when you iron it.
You can,
You can. Okay.
whatever gets those silly wrinkles out
Okay.
or the folds.
What
Yes,
kind of starch do you use? Just any kind? It's
I think it's Stay Flow in the grocery store. Comes in a blue bottle. The clerk at the store that I usually go to said, "What do you do with all that starch?" She said, "I don't mean to be rude, but you come in here and buy 3 bottles at a time." I said, "I don't like stretchy fabric." And she's going, "Does that make any sense to you?" I said, "It does if you're a quilter." She went, "Oh, yeah. I've heard of quilter language, people." But anyway,
Can I ask one more silly question?
no such thing as a silly
So you
question.
put your quilt all, do all your cutting, put all your quilt together, and then you send it to the long arm person. You don't wash it back out. It's
Nope.
just there.
It's there till the first time I wash it.
Okay, okay.
And I don't wash my quilts because I don't usually play in the mud.
Thank you for explaining this.
And so my feeling is, unless you've been playing in the mud, your quilts are not that dirty. And if you do, gotta have a color catcher, at least, depending on what colors they were. Anyway, we're now at the strip sets. Got those all done. By the way, I press all of my seams open. And I don't use my big, heavy iron. I use a little travel one. It's wonderful. They're about $15 at Walmart. And you can get between the points of the diamonds really easy without screwing up the one you just pressed. Yes.
I see your rows on your diagrams. Where's your strip?
Okay, you got the strips. You counted how many you need. Then you go back to your key where you've told what fabric to use first. Then you start at A, or you start by A, and you decide you're going to sew that strip set first. The first one is the orange. The next one is the yellow. Move it back 2.5 inches. That's an approximately, folks. I don't measure that part. And then the next one, you do green. And the next one, you do blue. And the next one, you do purple.
So that's the first.
That's, yes. And then it goes on. And those, you can change the letters from A at the top to F at the bottom. It does, as long as you get that one row. So we're ready to cut diamonds. Well, when you start using a 45-degree angle, you better have a big table that you're cutting on. I splurged and bought a Martinelli table. If you know what those are, it raises, it lowers. I have one sister who's 5 foot and one that's 6, and they all come to my house to cut their fabric. I wonder why. Nobody ever wanted to put a donated money in the box. My nephew that I taught to quilt, I should say, he comes to my house now if he needs to do, and he refuses to use regular cotton in his quilts because that stuff stretches. Did I not tell you that when I gave you a bottle of Best Press? Yeah, but I didn't think it'd stretch that much. I said, wrong. When in doubt, it'll stretch. So anyway, he uses upholstery fabric on all of his quilts. He does a great job. He asked me if I wanted one of the quilts that he made, and I said no, because I'm a little, well, not little, but I'm an old lady and trying to get out of the weight on one of his quilts. No, thank you. Anyhow, so we got our set strips and we're ready to cut. Make it a day that you can do nothing but cut. Because if you do, somebody's going to bother you and you'll forget what you're cutting. Because all those little rug rats that run around, or the big ones, that their favorite word was, Mom! I don't have that anymore, but sometimes I turn my phone on airplane mode because I know I'll get the message later on and it doesn't bother me. Anyway, when you cut your 45-degree angles, cut 2 strips, which are 3 inches. It was 3 inches when you first cut this, before you did your strip set. It's 3 inches when you cut them diagonally. So have as much room as you possibly can. If that means you lay your cutting mat on your dining room table, lock the doors and nobody gets in till you're finished. I cut 2 strips on my strip set, 2 cuts that are 45 degrees, and then I check them to see if what's left that I need to cut 8. I check to see if it's 45 degrees because the gremlins get in there and some of them are too far away and some of them are over. 42 inches is fabulous because you have enough to make 9 strips. So you can muck up one and still have enough fabric. After you have cut these diagonals, put them on a flat surface. Don't drape them over anything. And I label, when I'm done cutting row A, that label goes back on it. Because when you start putting the stars together, you can get mixed up. And if you have to pick out, stretching pops its ugly little head again. So as you go, you've got your sets done. Your 45-degree angles are cut. Now you're ready to sew them together. I sew A and B together. I do 2 of those. Then I press it open. And then I do 2 more, and I press that open. Till I get through the 8 of each of those rows. Now you have your stars, your points of your star that's ready to make a star. So you line it up, and I personally use pins, and that 1/4-inch seam will cross and look like this. I put my pin through both, and I don't quit fiddling with it until you go right through the seam. And then you move to the next one. Now, stretch pops its ugly little head again. They may not be the same. Up in the middle of it, you may have one that's that far over. Now, you want to put that on the bottom because your feed dog will help you get rid of that extra. And then you use stretch to your advantage and spread it out. You don't do it a lot, but if you can do it, it's well worth it. Usually I start from the middle star out, because if it stretches, you don't want it in the middle. You want it out on the end. That's how I do them. I don't know, there probably is a better way, but I don't usually teach old dogs new tricks. I would like to find somebody who could do the set-in squares that knew how to make them so they could be down one, down the other, and no set-in squares. I haven't found that person yet that can come up with that now. I can do the squares, but I can't do the triangles. Now, I know of a friend of mine who makes Lonestars all the time. She only cuts squares because she don't like the triangles. So she waits till she gets her whole quilt put together without the borders. And then she cuts them off. She has large triangles, and she's better than a triangle to sew in. But when you put the background, I usually go, by the way, you want to measure from the inside point all the way to the bottom on 3 of the stars. Add them together and divide by 3. I don't do that anymore. I just know that square is going to be 22 inches because I always make them the same way. So that's what I end up doing. Your triangle, you have to have 4 squares and 4 triangles. The triangles, you make a 1/2 inch bigger. So instead of 22 inches, it would be 22 and a half. If you're lucky and your background fabric is wide enough, you can get your triangles out of one cut. You got enough to have 22 and a half inches. When you cut one square that's 22 and a half inches, and then you cut it diagonally. What I usually do is press it diagonally, then I turn it over and cut. So it doesn't go like this. Did you have a question? Okay. So now if you wanted to change and make a smaller quilt, you just cut it off here and make a 5 row. Like you take off one row and then it's narrower. You get 24-inch smaller than if you have 6, because it's 3 inches and there's 8 of them. So that works better if you want to make them smaller. If you wanted to make a king, sometimes I've not had quite enough background fabric. In your guide, it says 10 inches. Well, if I only have 7 inches, I take the what happened? There it is. I take the leftover strip, sew them together, and I put one up here and one down here. And then you can tell which end is the top and the bottom. Then you can use your 7 inches to put on top of it. You know, don't let anything go to waste. I still have the pile of these sitting there. On one of the strip sets, I cut 9. And I went, oh, okay, well, toss that in the pile. But that's one of the things you can do is, you know, put it between the background and the 10 inches or before the 10 inches. Anyway, and usually I put 2 to 3 borders on my quilt. I don't like my quilts terribly large because I have a queen size bed. So I usually don't make the border section more than 8 inches. Because then you get 16 inches on 80. That's a pretty big quilt. And you have to pay to have it for a bigger quilt than you really need. So that's what I do, is I keep it down a little bit. I usually, and in your key, it says you use 6 colors, a half a yard. Well, if you want 2 borders on it, pick out which one it is and get another one. You have approximately a yard for a 3-inch border, and one for a 5-inch border is a yard and a half. Well, 2.5 yards, because I usually use that one to bind it with too. So, do you have any questions?
Say that again, how many for 3 inches?
It's in the back of your.
Never mind, I'll read it.
Yes.
I've been reading some patterns that say to cut down on the stretch. Instead of cutting width of fabric, cut your strips length of fabric. You ever done it? I know it makes me want to cringe because
I don't. Yeah, I can understand why you do it, but you've got
I know.
all those colors. You're going to
It makes
lose.
me sick.
You're going to have a lot of the same colors in that diamond.
Or a lot of weights, a lot of
Yeah.
extra half,
And-
half,
Basically, I know I have a very expensive hobby,
right?
so I like to cheat on the money as much as possible.
But you've never done it. Never tried it.
I don't even do it for borders. Cause I don't mind it, you know, I just put the seams together like you do. And works for me. Anybody else have a question? I know I hurried through this. This class takes about 2 days. So to get it done as fast as you are, as fast as we are today, that's about it, folks. If you have any questions at all, feel free to come up and look at these quilts if you'd like. Yes.
Do you have a good book or an author that people can go to?
Said my dad, I'm sorry. I complained that the Broken Star was too hard, so my friend, who was quilting, said, this is how you do it, it only has 8. And so, it's always good to change. Have an older sister that's the best seamstress in the 4 of us. She was probably the worst person to teach that there's ever been. Because she was a sewer. I said, now you want to be a quilter. There's a difference. And I'm one of the baby sisters. So, and she's the oldest sister. So she kind of has this doubt in her mind that I could know more than she does. But, and one of the things, if those of you who want to start this habit, I decided I wanted to give my children, I have a stepson and a goddaughter. Hello. If I move my head the wrong way, it stops. I should probably be moving my head the wrong way, right? Anyway, I decided that my children would get a quilt for every degree they got. Well, her high school diploma was the Broken Star. By the time she got to her second master's, I get a sweat in my eye. I don't want to cry. Anyway, she sent me a pattern. It took me 115 hours to piece that quilt. And then she told her stepbrother, who was doing his doctorate, she called him and said, you have to go online and decide what quilt pattern you want and make it hard enough that mom will spend as much time on the quilt as we spend on the degree. She's always been a thorn in my side. But anyhow, her husband got his master's last spring. And so she was complaining, Mom, you know, I don't have a Lonestar at my house. And I said, you have one for every season. Yeah, but Mom, they're getting old. And I said, so are you. Anyhow, so I made, just to irritate her, because we do that back and forth, I made her husband the tuxedo quilt without her knowing. And I sent it to him. And I put on the front of it, do not open until the person who this was addressed to is home. So she said, Mom's being sticky about this. Here, open it up. So he opened it up and I had the most wonderful phone call from him. He said, I've never had anyone make anything like this. And you made it for me? How did you know what colors? And I said, you silly man. You wear red, gray, and black. That's the colors of the quilt. Well, they had, because they live in Colorado Springs, they had the antifreeze in their walls that they have so their water doesn't freeze. It came out of the electrical plugs in their bedroom. The first text I got was from my son-in-law. Don't worry about it, Mom. No quilts were injured in this problem. So he saved the quilts. My daughter's trying to save the antiques. And she said, get in here and help me with the antiques. I gotta get the quilts. And she said, and why do you think, we know the person who made them. She could make us other ones. And he goes, no, I don't think she likes me that way. She's already made one. But anyway, unless you have very few children, or they don't plan on getting multiple degrees, don't start that habit. Because one of them might be a smart aleck and go looking on the internet for the most complicated quilt she can find. Anyway, please ask any question you have. And if not, I guess it's time for lunch, folks. Thank you.